Welcome to Board Game Binge, the place where we bring you bite-sized, bingeable board game content from across the industry. I'm your host, James Staley, and in this episode, we're welcoming back Eduardo Baraf from Pencil First Games. Eduardo is a game designer, developer, publisher, and the host of the popular YouTube channel Gaming with Edo. His current game, Mole Peak, is currently on Kickstarter. Edo, welcome to the binge. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me back on. I mean, after the first one, I'm still allowed to be on.
It's great. Awesome to have you back. For those who didn't see the first interview, I believe it was episode 82. So this is in March of last year. I can't believe it's been a year already. But at that time, we talked about Floriferous. And I just reached out to you earlier in the week saying, hey, I see you got another game. Let's chat about it, Mole Peak, because I know it's a follow-up to another game that you launched. For those people who don't know you, I'm wondering if you can kind of give us an overview of some of the games that you've launched. I know this is your 14th Kickstarter campaign. I think you've got even more titles than that.
Yeah.
But can you give us kind of an overview of kind of some of the popular titles, things people might know?
Yeah, for sure. So it's all under the Pencil First Games umbrella. It's the name of my company. And over the years, we've had a few different categories. We talk about our nature games and our adventure games.
Yeah.
So on the nature game side, we're easily best known for Herbaceous, which was designed by Steve Finn. And then with that partnership with Steve, we've made just a whole bunch of games in that zone. So we have Herbaceous, Floriferous, which you mentioned earlier, Sensitive of Water, the Whatnot Cabinet, all really easy to engage, beautiful, sort of gateway weight type of games that play in sort of a filler time frame, 20 minutes, 25 minutes, that kind of thing. We also have the 100 Tori, which was actually designed by Scott Caputo, but also sort of in that range. And soon we'll have Delicious, which will be another title, which is exciting. And then on the adventure side, we have some of our earlier titles, which people are probably less familiar with, like Lift Off, Get Me Off This Planet, or The Siblings Trouble, and Gem Pact. But more recently, the game that really took off in the sort of that side was Skull Hollow. And that's actually the game that's the original, that Mole Peak, which is live on Kickstarter now, is the sequel to. But Skull Hollow is a two-player asymmetric game where one player is playing as a gigantic guardian, gigantic beast, monster, and the other is playing as a band of Foxen characters. So it's like a one versus many asynchronous head-to-head two-player game. And that's on the adventure side, the one we're best known for. But we continue to try to make really high-quality, fun, beautiful titles.
Yeah.
And that's what we've been doing over the year, and we do it through Kickstarter typically.
So with the 14th, this is your 14th campaign. How many games in total have you guys published then? Did we lose Edo? I think I lost you. Oh, you're frozen. Well, while we're waiting for Edo to come back, I noticed.
Oh, there you are.
Oh, there you are. He's back. I was
back.
just asking.
I don't know what did I finish or?
Yeah, you finished. The only question I was going to ask is, I know there's 14 Kickstarter campaigns. How many total titles do you guys have?
Oh, gee.
I'm testing.
I don't know. It's not too many more than that, but it's probably if probably 15 or 16. Some of them are, we did Herbaceous and then we did the Pocket Edition. So there've been some titles like that. There was an interesting one, Heroes Welcome, which we published, but it was a partnership with Monkey Jump Games and Marco Blanc, who was the designer. So one of the things that's interesting about, Pencil First Games is pretty indie. As we were talking about earlier, I have a full-time job that's not in the video game industry. And Pencil First Games is really collaborations I get to do with all sorts of different folks from, different play experiences and fun and designers and artists.
Yeah.
And so it's really about making things that are fun, interesting, and compelling, but not so much. It's still sort of a title by title. So we'll swing wide sometimes and do some weird things,
Yeah.
sort of whatever we're up to. And Jessica Walker, who's fantastic, has also been helping me out a lot with the titles recently. But we have it's sort of whatever is a fun and interesting opportunity to work with folks and make games.
Yeah. It's an awesome hobby. I mean, there's no doubt about it, right? Like it is the hobby to be in. I think if you're passionate about creating and building, and then quite frankly, interacting with other people, I think it's awesome. So this kind of idea of kind of bucketing your games in categories, I find that kind of interesting. So is this something that you've kind of mapped out going forward to say we're going to have, these different kind of silos or these different kind of segments for games, or is it more free flowing than that? Or how have you kind of mapped that out going forward?
That's a great question. And it's something that's definitely developed over time,
Yeah.
but I think it was it's been a natural progression in that Herbaceous was an odd title. Herbaceous, very quickly, the story there was Beth Sobel, fantastic artist, had actually made a Bonanza reskin on BGG or something, and she was sharing it on Facebook, which is like these beautiful herbs.
Yeah.
And I saw that at the time, and I had done a couple Kickstarters at that point, but she was posting in some group, and I reached out and I said, hey, is that from a game or what? And she's like, no, it's this reskin. And I was sort of said, hey, well, what would you think if we made a game with it? And she was like, with new art? I was like, no, herbs, those things, but like just an original game.
Yeah.
And she was interested. And at first I was trying to actually just make a solitaire game for just to play with a cup of tea.
Yeah.
And I struggled. And that's actually when I connected with Steve, who I'd known from his Dr. Finn game stuff. And then he made it, he nailed it like on the first try. And, Herbaceous was really made for a market. It was made to be a game you could share with your parents, with your friends, like really all ages, really like easy to play, easy to learn, and really fantastic looking. And I really enjoy that space. It isn't the space that like I, as a designer, like naturally rolled into, but it's certainly a space I'm really comfortable with. So after we did Herbaceous, we ended up doing more. I enjoyed working with Beth, working with Steve, other artists as well, and designers. But it's like games I like. I like being able to play a game in 20 minutes. I like being able to play a game with my mom. I like being able, and so, when it's really fun to work on games you enjoy playing and you enjoy playing with like that really get the people, what's great about making gateway games is it's this huge opportunity to bring games to tables that like, you don't have to find somebody who likes games. Like you can take Herbaceous as an example, Proliferous, and just start playing with anybody. Which is awesome if you want to have date nights or family nights or whatever.
Yeah.
And so that sort of those games like led down that track. And then on the other side, I just had these big, colorful, bright games with Liftoff or Gem Pact or Siblings Trouble or whatever it's called. And so they just started falling into their own category, into the two categories. Then at the same time, things get expensive. You're making lots of products. You want to be able to be more successful in stores, and understanding that our brand was starting to be seen that way, in particular on the Herbaceous pretty side. I mean pretty, but just that game, that nature side.
Yeah.
And trying to sort of lean into it. Also the realization that like I think this is true for a lot of indie sort of, how do I say this in a humble way, but like companies that are driven by like a particular person, right, have the reflection of their skills.
Yeah.
And like what I'm really great at and I love doing is making games, right, and working with other people to make games. And so like I'm more inclined to make games than I am to like sit back and market existing games. And so like Herbaceous is in my opinion has like, I don't know, 1% of the potential exposure it could have. Like the success space is huge for that title. But like, I haven't been spending my time really like focusing on that. What I spend my time is making the next thing and making the next thing. So one of the conversations we've been having, and this is with Jessica, sort of like, well, if we're not going to sit down and really do a good job marketing our older titles, how can we just continue to make new titles but make them speak to our older titles.
Mm.
And oh, well, let's have a nature brand. And like when we promote one, let's promote one as part of this brand. And that sits and shows all the other games and keep them in the same play zone. And then have pan flips inside of them that advertise the other ones. So sort of making the tip of the spear of new player engagement also the tip of the marketing spear for the line, so to speak. This is the idea. And so sort of moving it to that regard is sort of a new development, if you will. But, we'll see how it goes. But they came out naturally, so to speak, but we're definitely leaning into them.
Do you have like a licensing agent or anything? Because to me, that's what that would speak to, right? It's like, okay, I'm the creator. I love creating games. That's what gets my juices flowing, is come out with the next big kind of game idea, right? And going through that kind of whole Kickstarter process or crowdfunding process to get out the door. But you still need somebody to work on the prior titles because there's still some gold to mine there, right? So is that where a licensing agent might come into play for you guys? Or?
Yeah, it could.
Or regional partners, for instance? Or
yeah, I mean, we definitely have done and do localization deals and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Not so much so far as an agent. And it's a mixed bag. I mean, we've definitely been on the localization side of international publishing. We've been approached by a number of agents who've worked with companies we know.
Yeah.
One of the challenges is that the board game space and board game publishing has really tight and limited margins. And
oh yeah, I know.
You're cutting in. When you're cutting in more and more folks, it becomes a challenge to continue to maintain that margin, especially when you have a high level of product quality and all of the rising costs from all the different angles. So it's never felt right to me. Also, a lot of our earlier titles were pretty bootstrapped, which is fine, but don't have the greatest, we have lots of rev shares on those old things, which it's how we built the business. It just doesn't make it easy to give another person another cut of the rev at some point. But we've talked about that. I think right now the biggest growth for Pencil First Games as a studio has been the amazing work that Jessica's been doing, and really that's sort of just starting to have another person take on our localization partnerships and our sales and retail. So she's our sales and operations manager, but she handles a lot of those pieces. And like at some point we could probably say, hey, let's get a person who's exclusive to doing that. But I don't know. I live in California and in the Bay Area, and the gap between hobby and job is substantial.
You live in one of the most economical places on the planet to live, right?
Yeah, no, but so and I'm married, I have 2 kids, and so the level of growth that we'd have to be at a place where I'm like, oh, this is going to cover my bills is so large that we do our sort of OKRs or objectives and key results, and look at what we're trying to accomplish each year in the overall sort of lifespan of the organization. And a lot of the aspirations of Pencil First Games is sort of like, hey, be in a place where we're able to continue to create and make fantastic games that people like, that we enjoy making, and be able to like have Jessica handle the things we need to do and not implode and all these things, and manage through the stresses of cargo shipping and all that. It's not like we should triple in size or we should do more games or we should, it's really a title by title process. So like, I guess when you, that's all to say, aspirationally, it's not that big, right?
I think it was James Hudson that recently said, or maybe it was a couple months ago, I was watching one of his direct to camera conversations he was having on
hopefully not the rant one.
It was a rant one, but still it was great. And the one thing he said in there that kind of resonated with me is he said, most indie publishers are like literally one campaign away from folding, right? Like like the margins are so slim, and the past 2 years have been so brutal for independent publishers that, I mean, it is very difficult to make a living at this, right? And Like, so for instance, if you were to kind of advise somebody, if somebody came to you and said, how much would I need to raise in a Kickstarter to make it viable as a living? Like, what would you say, like, minimum they would have to make on a Kickstarter campaign to be able to do that as just their job?
That's an interesting and complicated question. I think
It is.
like I would say don't quit your day job for
Well, of
a
course, yeah.
Kickstarter
Yeah.
in any manner. But it's because one, and this happened with I remember the guy. What was his name? Oh, he did Montana and Big Kid Games, right?
Yeah.
I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but at some point, one of his campaigns was his candy campaign was late. And he was like providing his finances to folks and reporting it. And one of the things he did is it's somewhere in there, it had like salary or payment for that for himself, right? Like living expenses or something. And like it all imploded when everyone was like, what? Your Kickstarter is not just paying for this product, it's also paying for you to like, live. And it's really interesting because
that's weird because it's not a charity, right? Like, why would people be concerned about him making money? I mean, Hudson even talks about this in that same rant, right? Where he says, of course you want the publishers to make money so they can make more games, right? If they're losing money, then they're not going to keep making games, right?
Yeah, I had a video about a similar topic, but the challenge is, if I'm running a Kickstarter and I say, hey, the person running the Kickstarter, like if you're the creator in Kickstarter running, the amount of time you spend, like, I don't think people understand how much it dwarfs anyone else's time. Like other people could be working well, but like you're working thousands of hours on top of it. But if I like told you what the Kickstarter funds were going to, as a creator, I can say we need to pay $20,000 for the art in the game. And we need to pay the cost of the manufacturing, and we need to pay the designer these royalties. But if I say, but I also want, part of this is we need to pay me for my time to do X, Y, and Z go forward. It's this odd breaking of Kickstarter trust culture, that really? Concept that the creator wants to take away any money from it as part of the baseline for creating it is just this odd.
Yeah, and I think it's how you position that, right? And I know we're probably getting off. We're going to get to your game in a second too, but this is a great conversation. I love it. So, like, and the reason I asked the question about like how much, right, is because I think sometimes people look at campaigns and they think, someone hits like, if I look at your campaign, which is over 6 figures now, they might say, wow, this guy's making bank, but you're not, right? And I don't think people necessarily understand that the margins are so slim that you need to get into the hundreds of thousands of dollars consistently if this is something that somebody wanted to do.
But like
as a day job, right?
The other thing is it's also not board games have all their costs and margins, but there are physical goods. You have to manufacture them and you have to ship them, right? Yeah. So for any way for that number to go up on a Kickstarter campaign means you need to produce more. So, I would imagine for most campaigns, even upwards of hundreds of thousands of dollars, the walk away from that campaign is, break even or negative.
Yeah.
I think most of the time, the equation that happens is, hey, like the equation that starts adding money on the backside is sort of like, hey, this will all pay for this. And what it'll pay for is, instead of printing just 3,000 copies or 4,000 copies or 5,000 copies, there's enough extra money in the campaign to print 10,000 copies.
Yeah, and then you sell the rest, and that's where
we'll fulfill everything. Right? And then there's this other 5,000 that you'll sell. But that math also only works if you sell those 5,000 copies. Yeah. If you don't sell them, it doesn't work either. And then you're sitting on a bunch of cardboard.
And if you're having to pay to store them, that's also a liability.
Yeah. Right. For sure. And so, I mean, I think, okay, to answer your question is, one, I don't think there is really any opportunity to cover any sort of extended life.
Yeah.
A Kickstarter isn't a business. A Kickstarter is a funding opportunity for a product. And it's less about how high the number is. It's how well you thought through the costs and the expenses of it. And again, with Proliferous, when I was doing the initial math on that project or whatever, shipping that kind of product was probably $2,000 or $3,000, which was manufactured in China.
Yeah.
For the volume of it, or 3 or 4 or 5. by the time we went through COVID and the shipping crisis and all that stuff, that $2,000, $3,000 turned into like $20,000.
Yeah, that happened to me on Nerdy
And
Squirrels as well. It was like
yeah,
five
and
times what we had actually what the
yeah,
quote
and
was
that's
when
not
we
like,
funded. By the time we're ready to ship, it was 5 times the cost, and we had to
yeah,
eat it.
and yeah, you
Yeah,
have to eat it. Well, you don't. I mean,
you don't
I
technically
mean,
have to eat it, but I
yeah, but
mean, it's not great going back to your backer saying I
yeah,
need more money, right?
right, and
Yeah,
for sure, and I think it's and so there's an example. So especially now,
yeah,
I just wouldn't. I wouldn't take. Sometimes because one of the devils of, for lack of a better term, of Kickstarter is you get all the money immediately.
yeah.
So, Mr. Hudson funded his game. He's sitting on, week, $950,000. For a brief moment in time, he got all this money. But the reality is you owe a lot of, you're going to instantly be spending it, and you're going to be spending it all the way down the wire, and you don't know what's to come. So anyone who has run a Kickstarter is just like, put the money aside and don't act like it's yours.
Mm-hmm.
Go through the entire, and sorry, we were talking about James. You brought up James. I'm not trying to suggest James would take any other action.
No,
but
no,
my
no.
point is, you want to set it aside until you've completely fulfilled and met the obligations of that Kickstarter. And then, hey, at the end of that,
Yeah,
maybe
if there's anything left over, yeah.
I mean, back in the day, there were campaigns that actually generated a profit.
Yeah.
Not huge, but like, oh, hey, I mean, for most of the early days, because now I have some games that are in reprint, which is a totally different thing. But in the early days, basically, I funded the first game, with some help from a colleague. Maybe we went 5,000-10,000 in,
Mm-hmm.
and then the end of the campaign, Liftoff didn't make money. It ended up being underwater. But then the second campaign sort of made enough to make the next game. And sort of there was this bumping like $10,000 or $15,000 that would be like a campaign would fund, get delivered, and then it would be back. And then you'd spend it to work on the next game, and then you'd go through it, and it would be back. It wasn't until Herbaceous started getting reprints. And like in many ways, Herbaceous was the game that stabilized Pencil First Games. And for a scope and scale of magnitude, like I don't have the number in front of you, but let's say Herbaceous has sold, I don't know, 25,000 copies. Awesome number. That's not a huge number over 5 years, but it's a fantastic number. That was enough. Just being able to, when you look at again, like a game, a massive mass market game would be 2.5 million copies.
Yeah.
A really big indie, board game would be like 200,000 copies. So, initial campaign was maybe 2,000-3,000. That's when I get to that 1% of the market. So I feel like if Herbaceous, I think, is a mass market title, has the opportunity to be a 2 million unit title, and it's only done 20,000-25,000. But the point is that little bit of money was enough to like continue to just give us a little bit more options,
A little more gas
and let
in
us
the tank.
make Skull Hollow look a little bit better, and just start to make those decisions. And I mean, unfortunately, again, on living on it or not, rising costs and shipping and all that stuff, like whatever extra lift that would have given, the unexpected $20,000, $30,000, $40,000.
Yeah.
Even I thought we were sort of out of it. I did this amazing thing. I actually just shared a video on it. We did this great reprint run with all of our titles. I made sure it would fit in a certain cargo to like minimize the damage of all of this.
Yeah.
And
Shanghai shut down again.
Shanghai shut down. No, nothing my size, no 20 feet, only 40 feet. And guess what? Now it's 30, 35, 40,000. Like it is frustrating.
Yeah, it's crazy. Let me give you two final thoughts on this one, because I do want to get to Mall Peak in a second.
Sure.
So the thing you said earlier on, I think is important to note, is that it's never advisable to build a salary into a campaign. It's better to build cushion in your campaign to cover off unforeseen costs. And if you get lucky enough to manage that campaign effectively, then that cushion could be put into marketing for another campaign, or maybe it could result in minor profits, or allow you to buy a bigger print run, and you can use that larger print run to manufacture copies. So I want to leave that point, because I think that's important to note, right? And I don't want to mislead people to think that all these game creators out there are building, huge profits into their games, because they're not, and that's the point I was trying to make. The second thing is that it is so tumultuous, this environment, that if you don't build in any type of a cushion, you could be in for a lot of hurt, right? And when you made your point of, take like a large campaign like that James had done, for instance, and Kickstarter sends you your money, and you're like, for like 30 seconds you're like, yay, I got all this money, and then boom, 15-20% to tax man. The freight cargo guys who are actually shipping the games, from China to North America and to the different distributions, they take their mouth. By the time it's all said and done, there's not a lot left over. Hopefully there's enough that you can at least get as you're saying, a little fuel in the tank to start that next campaign. And hopefully over time, these things snowball and you get a large enough portfolio that on scale, there's a business there, right? But anyway, let's jump into Mall Peak, because this is a really cool game. Talk to us, and I'm sharing the screen for people that are watching the actual, either on Instagram Live or on YouTube. But one thing you were definitely known for is artwork in your games. Whether the nature-based ones, I love the photography that's been done in a lot of your kind of glamour shots. But just the artwork itself, and this one is no different, but definitely kind of a different style, obviously, than nature.
Sure.
You have this kind of 2-player game, which is an extension, or I guess a sequel. Is that fair to say? It's a sequel to the one that came before this?
Yeah. In particular,
Skull Hollow?
It's a sequel. Yeah, Skull Hollow was the original title.
Yeah.
And this is a standalone sequel that's fully cross-compatible. So basically, if you just back and look for a copy of Mall Peak, you can play Mall Peak head-to-head and get as much, in my opinion, gameplay, if not probably a little bit more gameplay in Mall Peak than when folks got and loved Skull Hollow. So it's like full equal weight. If you put the box next to each other, you'll get the Guardian count and the Grizzer versus the Fox, and all. They're all different, but there's the same sort of weight of content in there. And then, but what you can do is, so it's 2-player asymmetric. One has foxes, the other has bears, and they all have these different guardians, which are on the page. If you're seeing that, think of like Shadow of the Colossus. You can mix and match them. So you can take the old guardians versus the new, the bears, or the Grizzer, or you can take the new guardians, go versus the foxen. The other super neat thing we did, which is a little bit crazy, but it came out well, but it's crazy, is you can also mix them together and play like a 3 or 4-player version of the game, where you're
I saw that. That's cool.
going, the Grizzer and the Foxen versus 2 Guardians at the same time on the small board. It's like the Smash Brothers version of it. So it ultimately we didn't just want to do expansion packs. We wanted to stand on its own as a product, but it really sits and works really well with the original.
And then these there's 2 things that really stood out to me. One is the Meeples. I mean, the Meeples are fantastic, right? So I think
Awesome.
you even had like a credit in there of like someone who's actually in charge of just designing the Meeples. But
yeah, Helen, yeah.
They are super cool. And so is it like an abominable snowman? This kind of snow creature guy?
Oh, Saboso, yeah. So one of the things that we did with Mall Peak was we went into the wintry mountainous snow biome, right? Like it's very video game in that kind of way. And actually, the first Guardian we did was Veblen, who's the giant spider, the crystalline spider. That was who we originally had sort of earmarked. We'd wanted to make in the original game and then made it here. But then we wanted to have like a really big lumbering monster, sort of in the vein of Grak, who's like the starting monster in Guardian and Skull Hollow. And Keith Mateka, who is the designer from Thunderworks Games, role player, flipping amazing designer and guy. We were working on it. He was talking about it, and he went down this track with Saboso, who has this giant cell in its chest, and as you're fighting the Grizzer, you can stun them and freeze them and pick them up and like remove them from the game. So there's this like lumbering giant beast, sort of inspired by like a combination of Abominable Snowman, the abomination from WoW, maybe a little marshmallow from Frozen, whatever you're working on, but just this giant monstrous snowman. Um, Justin Faust, the artist,
Hmm.
the illustrator, who's amazing here. The cool thing about this game is how he takes this sort of cartoon Disney esque vibe, but like ratchets it up, like even like there's Secret of Nim, but even further into this sort of like monstrous, grotesque thing. But it's still bright and colorful too. So it's this really like scary, but also not so scary zone
Hmm.
that I think really works for the games.
It's super cool looking. You've hit, I'm going to put this in Canadian dollars because it always sounds bigger and it's the only way I can see it. You hit roughly almost 124,000 on
Oh, look at that in
25,000.
Canadian.
Yeah, $25,000 goal. 1,910 backers. So congrats on that. Still 6 days to
Thank
go.
you.
You get the back end hockey stick, obviously. So I'm sure you guys are going to be very, very happy where this campaign lands. What I thought was kind of cool when I was looking at the pledge levels is the number of people that backed at the level where they got the original Skull Hollow as well as Mole Peak. So they got both, right? So I think it's kind of cool that you're seeing a number of people that you're carrying over, right, from prior pledges on your other campaign. But you've got new people you're bringing into the franchise as well that are saying, maybe missed out on that first campaign. Now they got a chance to get the original plus the secondary
Yeah,
one.
it's. I mean, I suspected that we would have some folks, but certainly there's been a large group that
Yeah.
have dug into that pledge level, which has been great. Also, at the same time, it's not like you can't get Skull Hollow; it's a real game. So we've also seen more people engaging with Skull Hollow off the Kickstarter, which is awesome as
Yeah.
well. Part of it is one of the extra things we did. So there's a sort of like a Kickstarter mini expansion on the original, which you can get if you back through it. Though it's also, again, it's not at retail, but you can go to our website to get it. But then we have another one for Mall Peak. But then we did this really, I think, fairly novel thing, which is we have this Runes and Ruins. It's this single player adventure that sits between the two games, and actually it's a separate box, and it's actually a deck of cards with like scratch off cards, like if you like lottery tickets,
Okay.
and
Yep.
it's like this adventure of this Arctic fox that's traveling between Skull Hollow and Mall Peak, and you're sort of it's like a not legacy, but it's a scratch off game, like a choose your own adventure where you're getting different stats and you making a original specific character, and then when you get all the way through, you can use that box in either of the games with a special rule set. And so it's this really neat connector between the two
Yep.
that really came out well. So I think it's a cool value add on the
And
campaign
that's
for
just
folks.
included. Like you guys are throwing that in.
Yeah, it's just included.
Oh, that's
Will
cool.
It'll be for sale afterwards, but it sort of served two purposes. Interestingly, one was a bunch of people always want solo modes, and actually, Pencil First Games has a pretty good track record of fantastic solo modes
Yeah.
in all of our other titles, including by Keith Mateka, who's the designer of this one.
Yeah.
But like, Mall Peak and Skull Hollow have always been like unabashedly two-player direct head-to-head games, but also we like went through this big dive into different solo experiences within the titles and a solo guardian and bouncing around. It's like, well, if you're going to make a cool guardian, why don't you make him good for multiplayer? And then, if you really want to do the solo guardians, well, you'd want to make original solo experiences for all the guardians. And then, actually, let's make more of a tower defense solo experience. But then that's like its own game. And so we were going round and round, and we wanted to do something, and that's why the idea of like sort of how could we create a narrative experience. And actually, Alara and Eric Slauson did the design with Seth Johnson doing some of the narrative work, and we sort of built out this sort of crafty, fun narrative experience. But like we didn't want to sell, it's like you didn't want to sell it because it's sort of like not like within the campaign it'd be like selling a solo mode and then you're suddenly making it sound like you're going to get solo within the game, and we didn't want to do that. And so when you think about it, or at least when we thought about it, it's if you think about marketing and things you can do to spend money on your campaign to do it bigger, rather than, because we don't actually at Pencil First spend a whole lot on marketing, like ad marketing, campaign marketing. rather than like doing all that spend, we instead put the money towards making something novel and fun and neat that everyone gets. So it's like, instead of spending money in marketing, we're just going to give you more stuff that you can enjoy, and so let people know about it. And then we will make it available on our site and sell it and stuff afterwards. But it was just a neat, fun little product, and I'm hopeful that people like it as much as we do. And then maybe if we make a third game, we can link to the other ones and keep it going a little bit.
Well, clearly the strategy's working. If there's people that want to follow along on this campaign, I am putting a link directly in the show notes that you can click on, or you can go to Kickstarter and simply do a search for Mall Peak. You'll find it there, or Pencil First Games, quite frankly. You'll find the entire portfolio.
Yeah.
If they want to check out your website, I believe it's pencilfirstgames.com too, right?
Yep, that's it. Yeah. And that is a pretty colorful page, and it will show you all those products pretty quickly.
You got links to everything. Eduardo, it is always awesome having you on the podcast. I always enjoy our conversations. I want to thank you so much. I want to wish you all the best with this campaign. Can't wait to see where it lands, and I wish you and your team all the best this coming year. You take care.
Awesome. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me.
Cheers, man. This has been an episode of the Board Game Binge podcast, hosted by James Staley, produced by James Staley and Mike Bruner, with original music by Nick Smith. If you would like to watch these interviews live, simply subscribe to our YouTube channel, Board Game Binge, and you'll get access to live interviews, giveaways, and interesting board game content from across the industry. I can't wait for you to join us. See you next time.